Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the News Brief Special. Today we're going to be talking about the hypocrisy and projection in Russian motives to invade Ukraine to, of course, save us from Ukrainian neo-Nazis. However, how do you fight Nazis with Nazis? Anyways, we're going to be talking about it in the comments, so you don't have to suffer alone through this, and I don't have to suffer alone through this. And of course, I hope that you enjoy this episode and you like the new format. And if you do, please give this episode a like and share it with a friend. And I'm asking you for it preemptively. Let's go. The reason why I chose the subject today is because I think we never necessarily ever explored this sort of narrative about, saving Ukraine from neo-Nazis and Ukraine being raging with neo-Nazis that Russia has been using as one of its justifications for the invasion of Ukraine. Well, largely because there is not a lot of materials to show you what's really going on in Russia and how that statement makes absolutely no sense in English. All of these materials are in Russian, so this episode today is going to be largely based on the reporting of a Russian journalist, which I am so not happy about, but it's a Russian opposition journalist, and they're reporting in Russian, and they have the most information I was able to find on the internet, so we're going to have to work with it. Anyways, Russia's statement that they're freeing Ukraine from neo-Nazis holds no value because in the Russian army, there are units of paramilitary organizations and groupings that have been used by the official armed forces of Russia since the war in Syria, and they have been used officially. And these units quite openly claim themselves to be Nazis. One of such units is Rusich. Rusich is a paramilitary organization or a private military company. Honestly, it changes from time to time. And they officially participated in Russian campaign in Syria, and they also participate in Russia's war against Ukraine. Here is the founder of the Rusich group, and here is a video in Russian with subtitles where he has been saying that he is a Nazi. And he goes on to clarify that he's not going to be going into, whether he's a nationalist or an imperialist or something else, and he doesn't want to make it vague, so he's just going to say it straight. He is a Nazi.
Meet Sergeant, and according to some sources, already junior lieutenant of the Russian army, Alexei Melchakov, also known as Serb and Fritz. He is the commander of the neo-Nazi group Rusich, which, according to Melchakov himself, has long been an official unit of the Russian armed forces.
I'm a Nazi. I'm a Nazi. I won't go into details. Nationalist, patriot, imperialist direction, and so on. I say it outright. I'm a Nazi. I could even raise my hand.
That's cool. I mean, you would think maybe the Russian government does not know about this. Maybe the Russian government is not aware. Maybe this is just sort of, a one-of-a-kind type of situation, and they need all hands on deck, so they just give it a slap on the wrist. No. The Russian government is very well aware. They really support this unit. He has been meeting with a lot of Russian politicians. They have been talking him up. There have been lots of Russian bloggers that are showing his work and talking to him as a military expert. He has a lot of cred, as one would say, in Russia.
Melchakov was once awarded by the head of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, and is now on friendly terms with State Duma deputies from United Russia, Alexander Borodai, and Vladimir Milonov. Aksyonov could theoretically have been unaware of whose hand he was shaking, but Borodai and Milonov are very well informed. For several years now, Melchakov has had an open friendship with former athlete, current employee of Channel 1, and recent recipient of a Russian government award, Mariana Naumova.
Hello everyone. Today Alexei Serb, an experienced fighter, and I will show you what a soldier's first aid kit should look like. Alexei, take it away.
He is also in contact with military correspondent Alexander Sladkov from Channel 2. Sladkov, too, is well aware of Melchakov's atrocities, but shrugs it off. That's how he is, the commander of Rusich, for better or worse.
Now you would think, hey, that's the only example, right? There are no other units like that. You're just kind of looking for a needle in a haystack. Well, no, there is also another unit called Espanyol, which is made up of football fans and neo-Nazis. And they're also openly neo-Nazis, and they say they also have people interested in football in this unit. And this unit is being transmitted, as the other unit as well, on Russian TV. Well, if that's not enough, we also had PMC Wagner, where the founder of Wagner and his right-hand man had swastika tattoos and Nazi symbolism all over their bodies, and they have also been openly calling themselves radicals and Nazis. So really, this is not a one-of-a-kind or one-in-a-million story in Russia. It's quite popular. Russia also has neo-Nazi marches going on in Russia every year. Well, maybe not right now because, large gatherings of people are illegal. But before that, there was always a march where walking around the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg en masse talking about white supremacy. But let's go back to Rusich for a second. So the founder of Rusich, Alexei, has not only given an interview where he was talking about being a neo-Nazi, he has also mentioned that, it's killing humans that he really loves. It's a thrill like no other. Yes, he also disturbingly calls it hunting. If you have never hunted, you should try hunting for people, because that is, what gives you the thrill. Before Alexei had become an avid human hunter in his career, he was hunting animals, and he was doing all sorts of videos of torture of animals online and all sorts of videos of just very, very disturbing stuff that he was doing to absolutely defenseless animals. And as a fan of true crime here myself, I would like to say that a pattern seems to be showing there, where lots of serial killers, incredibly violent serial killers throughout history, started from torturing animals and being proud of it and calling it a thrill. And here are some examples of those killers. We of course have Jeffrey Dahmer, who started with animals. We also have the Dnipro killers, or Dnipromaniacs. They're actually a set of killers from Dnipro in Ukraine, which is quite upsetting, but it is what it is. And many, 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 many others. So it's safe to say that something is wrong with these people. Some chemical imbalance might be going on in their brain, and they all have a similar trait of starting with animals and moving on to humans. Now, Alexei and other commanders from similar units in Russia have been giving orders to behead Ukrainian POWs, to commit crimes against humanity towards Ukrainian POWs, to execute Ukrainian POWs, but not just shooting them in the back or shooting them in the head. No. With incredibly torturous acts. And these acts are usually filmed. A lot of them have leaked online. And of course, I can't show clips of it in this episode because we would just be banned on YouTube. But I can show you news articles about it where various international organizations are confirming it. There is ISW that's confirming it, and also here is an article of ISW confirming that Russian Nazis are fighting in the ranks of the Russian military against Ukraine. There is Der Spiegel, a very highly accredited German publication. There is also the International Criminal Court, at the head of George Clooney's wife Amal Clooney's foundation, investigating these crimes against humanity and torture, and also SA from Russians as acts of war crimes against Ukrainian POWs. So saying that Russia came to liberate Ukraine from neo-Nazis is either projection or incredible hypocrisy, because while we have all of this evidence that is largely unavailable in English, which is why probably a lot of people don't know about it, which is why we're here today talking about it, no matter how much I absolutely hate doing it, because it's just so unsettling and so disturbing. But there is all of this evidence of Russian officials welcoming these neo-Nazi movements, welcoming these Nazis. There is all of this evidence of the Russian military having no problem with it. There is all of this evidence of commanders really welcoming these torture methods and Nazi methodology in invading a country, while the best evidence that Russian propaganda was able to plant in the Western media about Ukrainian Nazis' existence is fake stories that no one can confirm, and a couple of Ukrainian servicemen that either looked the part, which heavily tattooed and gel in their hair, which hey, if that's a sign of a neo-Nazi, then boy, do we have a problem worldwide with people that just have a particular fashion sense. And the other part of evidence was Vice News and a lot of different publications basically partaking and painting a picture about Azov in particular in 2015 and 16 as being neo-Nazis because their recruitment rituals looked a particular way with fire and, people saying Slava Nazi, which means glory to the nation because Nazi in Ukrainian is nation, not Nazi. So all of this information is manipulated and there are actually no acts recorded of racism or bigotry or Nazi ideology on the behalf of Ukrainian servicemen of any unit, really. There might have been pictures, some photoshopped with, swastika symbolism, and some, in fact, needle in the haystack cases where someone had a patch, but there were no acts of any Nazi actions recorded. While here, we have plenty. For instance, a Russian athlete from a karting team was zigging while he was on a pedestal for winning, I think it was a third or a second place. He was later disqualified. There are many Russian athletes that stand there with Gregorian ribbons, which basically mean the policy of the Russian world and extermination of Ukrainians. That's a Nazi ideology. And there are lots of athletes that have been zigging and supporting the extermination of a nation. So that is quite literally Nazism. It might not be swastikas and the German ideology, but the idea behind it is the same. And Russia welcomes them, Russia puts them on a pedestal, and Russia shows them as heroes of their nation. So, hypocrisy, projection, you let me know what you think. So some who support Russia might say, well, no, their Nazi ideology is only directed at Ukrainians, which is obviously an adversary nation, and it makes sense. It doesn't, but let's go with that. And they're not necessarily racist or anything to anyone else. It's just Ukrainians. Sure, you can find any way to justify war crimes, I see, but no, it in fact does spread on other people. In fact, it spreads on people within their own nation. If you have heard of Chechens ever in your life, then the commander of Rusich unit, actually, he had to shake a hand of a Chechen general, and then the neo-Nazi groups in Russia were so upset that he had to release a video walking his followers and his idealizers through why he had to do that, and why that particularly doesn't fall under, diverting from the neo-Nazi ideology. Chechens are Muslims, so of course, if he is a Nazi, how can he possibly shake a hand with a Chechen general? And that caused a stir. And it was a well-known big scandal in Russia, and many people were so disappointed in him with not following through with the Nazi ideology.
The commander of Akhmat, Abti Ala Udinov, outplayed Melchikov, and he did it quite diplomatically. Somehow he managed to force Melchikov to come to him, shake hands on camera, hug, and exchange pleasantries.
And we are at war, a war that must continue until we defeat the army of the Antichrist and Dajjal that fights against us. In this regard, what the West is imposing on us, all these so-called satanic movements they want to drag us into, is unacceptable for us. This is our common mission. Ultimately, we've come to agree that we have a common enemy.
The Russian hero and general of the Russian army didn't suffer any damage to his uniform's honor from fraternizing with a butcher and an open Nazi. Alaudinov, aside from his speech about the Antichrist, even made a post completely ignoring the fact that Melchikov is a pagan. No enemy will stand against a united people. We will prevail because we are on the Lord's path, and we are Russia. So, while Alaudinov's uniform remained unstained from his meeting with the commander of Rusich, Melchikov's reputation took a huge hit after shaking hands with a Chechen commander. He even had to defend himself before the neo-Nazi community.
Admin, please post this on the channel so everyone understands. Gentlemen, I believe I can decide for myself who to associate with and who not to. I've never strayed from my position, and I've never denied being who I am. This is my personal business. Who I communicate with, how I interact, and what I choose to do, that's my decision. Especially, why should I refuse a hand of friendship? For what? For your feelings?
However, many Russian neo-Nazis didn't accept Melchakov's explanation. It caused a massive scandal. Even one of Melchakov's former close associates, Yevgeny Raskazov, also known as Topaz, wrote a post ending with the rhetorical question, "How much is your honor worth?" Although what honor could there even be in all this?
He does hate the Muslims. He does hate the LGBTQIA people. There are millions of crimes committed in Russia, daily, weekly, against minorities. And when they're committed by groups like Rusich or Espanyol or any other neo-Nazi groupings in Russia, of which there are plenty, because, you know, as I mentioned priorly, they have marches every year. When these crimes are committed, the police actually doesn't react. The police doesn't react anymore because what's the point, right? And these are national heroes and these are people that fought for Russia. So why would they punish them for crimes? Speaking of which, there are also a lot of these people with Nazi ideology and Nazi symbolism and tattoos and all of that stuff in Russian prisons. And now, basically, if they have been caught, or even before they go to prison, if they have been caught for crimes that are, you know, racist or sexist or beating up women or beating up minorities or killing someone, they can just opt into going into the military and joining the war in Ukraine, and then they get out, and then they literally get a get out of jail free card. So talk about morals, right? These people also justify their crimes to the people of the greater Russia, to the greater population of Russia, and in general as this does follow the Russian ideology. This is something the Russian church and the Russian ideology would want you to do because the Russian nation is supposed to be pure. The Russian nation is chosen. The Russian nation is the best nation in the world. It's under God. And if you don't believe me here is Russia's main philosopher. He has been given the nickname of Putin's Rasputin because, you know, Tsar Alexander II had this advisor, spiritual advisor, also just a generally creepy, crazy man, Rasputin. And Dugin is that in Russia for Putin. He has created the ideology, or not created, but propagated the ideology of the Russian world and Eurasianism, which basically means white power. And Russia and Russian world are above everything else. And this ideology, mind you, is being spread in the Russian church. You know, that one with the proper Russian values and all of that? So the ideology basically states that everyone who is adjacent to Russia, so, you know, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, anything that has ever been under Russian rule and Russian imperialism is Russia. And they have to adhere to the Russian language and the Russian world. Of course, if they're not white and if they're not purely Russian, they're like the second sort of citizens. But if Russia has ever touched them with its influence, then they're Russian, and they have to adhere to this policy that Russia is above else. And if they don't, they need to be exterminated because they simply are not of the right mindset and of the right beliefs, and they're a threat to the thriving of Russia, the Russian world, and them being the chosen ones. And that, my friends, is the main philosopher in Russia, the main ideologist in Russia. He's very often quoted in a lot of Western publications as the mastermind behind Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He's not really the mastermind behind Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, this ideology in Russia has existed since the dawn of ages. He just put it on paper and made himself famous for it. And of course, you know, is very close to Putin. So he is just one of the most famous propagators of that. But then Patriarch Kirill is also one of the most famous propagators of the Russian world. And he's the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. So make your conclusions yourself. But I think that it's pretty evident how hypocritical and backwards the whole idea of Russia exterminating Nazis in Ukraine while glorifying them at home is. I mean, call me crazy, but just seems to make no sense to me. Now, of course, we have to get into specific examples of these Russian generals and Russian paramilitary organizations and other bodies that fight the war in Ukraine, giving these incredibly radical, incredibly criminal orders. There have been quite a few cases documented on camera of Russian generals giving out orders to execute Ukrainian POWs, to behead Ukrainian POWs, and very recently there was a voice recording of a Russian general leaked giving out an order to behead, dismember, and torture Ukrainian prisoners of war. And these orders are very graphic, and there has been an investigation done on the matter, and this is not this general's first order. He has given orders like that before. It's kind of his MO, and that is part of asserting dominance, because of course you want to show and parade the fact that this is how you deal with the other side, which by definition is what Nazis did.
Talk to this Ukrop yourself personally and eliminate him. Did you understand me?
Why would you want to assert dominance and parade the beheading and dismemberment of someone that you had taken prisoner of war? I think that also tells you everything and a lot that you need to know about the Russian ideology and what they're going into this invasion with. We have, of course, seen a horrendous video of Russian military castrating Ukrainian POWs or a Ukrainian POW, and while the video is thankfully the only one on the internet, or at least, you know, on the broader web, not the dark web, I don't know what one can even find there from the Russian military, to be honest. But we, of course, have heard about this video, and if you haven't, well, that existed and that happened. But this was presented as sort of like the one big noisy case that everyone has heard of, but this happens quite systematically and quite systemically to Ukrainian prisoners of war in Russian captivity. And then a lot of people say, you know, war is hell, so what did you expect? Well, I mean, the Geneva Convention. We expect the Geneva Convention because, of course, in Ukraine, Russian prisoners of war are treated so well that actually a lot of Ukrainians are angry because they earn salaries and they have to have their dwelling and clothes provided to them and food provided to them up to a certain Geneva Convention standard, which is much nicer than a lot of the minimum wage jobs and a lot of the minimum wage requirements for, well, a lot of nations. And it's quite distressing, it's quite upsetting, but these cases are not far and few in between. These cases are happening all the time. Sexual assault is also used as a tool of dominance and as a tool of torture of Ukrainian POWs, and again, it is also used to assert dominance. The reason why they sterilize Ukrainian men in captivity is because, you know, it's similar to eugenics. Ukrainian men are not supposed to reproduce. It's because if you sterilize them, they're not able to come back home and make babies. So that is just the wiping out of the Ukrainian nation, which under the Russian world is something that needs to happen because Ukraine is rejecting the ideology that Russia is above everyone and we need to be subservient to them, which again is just Nazism wrapped in a bow and given a fancy name of the Russian world and put into the Russian church as something holy and spiritual. Now, again, you can say war is hell and these things are happening to POWs because, you know, there are lots of atrocities and lots of crimes that different countries have committed in different wars and you just can't escape it, which is still, you know, crazy, and that's what we have the Geneva Convention for, and it was literally drawn up because of these cases for the civilized world in 2025 to not have to go through that, but sure. This brings me to Bucha, this brings me to Irpin, this brings me to Borodyanka, this brings me to Izum, this brings me to Mariupol, this brings me to Slovyansk, this brings me to Ukrainian cities that Russians have invaded, that Russians have occupied, especially the cities in the Kyiv region, where they have been mass executing civilians, innocent people. And these civilians in Mariupol, of course, they were bombed to death, and a lot of them also were taken captive, and we still exchange Ukrainian civilians to this day who have been in Russian captivity since the war started, the full-scale war started in 2022. Why are there civilians in captivity to begin with, and why are they there for 3 years, and why is Russia not exchanging them back? But that's besides the point. When you look at what had happened in Bucha, and there is actually a movie that is very hard to watch that recently came out that details the events of the Russian occupation of Bucha, and you should watch it. But if you look at these events in all of these Ukrainian cities, you will find mass graves. In a lot of these cases, civilians have their hands tied behind their back and they're executed with a shot to their head. In a lot of these cases, if they're women, they have been sexually assaulted pre and post-mortem. Kids have been sexually assaulted. Men have been sterilized. They have been tortured and assaulted, and some of their fingers have been cut off, some of their nails are missing. So these are forbidden tactics of torture, and these are done in the name of executing Ukrainian civilians because they don't deserve a right to live, because they're Nazis. Yet they're being executed by people whose ideology is, we want to exterminate this nation. Do you see the irony here? There are a lot of Ukrainian refugees that came to Poland in the beginning of the invasion, especially women, because the Russian military was giving out orders to sexually assault them and impregnate them. You know, because Russians need to be born out of these people, not Ukrainians. And a lot of these women, because they ended up in Poland as refugees, they weren't able to get abortions because Poland doesn't allow for abortion. So a lot of these women, in fact, had to give birth to babies from Russian soldiers and give birth to Russians from a very traumatic experience. So Russia, in fact, uses Nazism, Nazi ideology, and tactics as their way of imposing their Russian world and as their way of spreading this Russian world and exterminating everything that does not fall under the category of it. Tell me this does not remind you of something. Tell me that mass graves do not remind you of something. Tell me that this idea of, not letting certain people reproduce and only letting them reproduce with Russians doesn't remind you of eugenics. Tell me this does not look like 1938, 9, 40, 41, 42 to you, because it certainly does look like it to me. And tell me that it doesn't look like Russia is mirroring what it's doing to other people in order to protect and justify themselves, because it certainly is exactly what they're doing. And hopefully this video has given you enough information to have evidence that that's exactly what they're doing, and to be armored against comments like these, and knowing how to respond to them and knowing how to rebuff them, because of course this is Russia's main tool of propaganda, is to mirror what they're doing onto the people they're doing it to, and presenting it as if the people that they're doing it to are guilty of Russia's crimes. So neo-Nazis and radical organizations and the ideology and radicalism in general is part of Russia's warfare against Ukraine, against Syria, against every place that they have ever invaded. And in fact, when Russia invaded their own Chechens, they were also using this ideology of purification and Russianization, right? And eradication of language and all of that, which is Nazism. Russia uses it systematically. Russia uses it every day. Russia uses it themselves. They glorify parades of neo-Nazis. They glorify the blonde, blue-eyed, white Russian phenotype of a person as, above everyone else and superior in their own country. And of course, they try to present this idea of the Christian nation with a nuclear family and anti-LGBTQ ideas. Meanwhile, Russia has some of the highest rates of prostitution, some of the highest rates of AIDS, some of the highest rates of crime, domestic violence, criminal activity, murders, alcoholism, and Russians don't really go to church. Their church propagates the idea of exterminating other nations. Is that really Christianism to you? Because it certainly isn't to the rest of the world. Their military consistently keeps committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, for which they're going to be tried in The Hague, and there are already so many cases open with the International Criminal Court and in The Hague. In fact, if Putin were to go to most of the countries of this world, he would be arrested and put on the bench, and so would be his soldiers and Russians in general, for the fact that most of them support it. So next time you see a comment that says Ukrainians are Nazis and Russia needs to cleanse them, maybe remember this video, maybe look into it, maybe research a little deeper in the inner workings of Russia, and think to yourself, and maybe try to let Russians know that they need to start the denazification at home, because the only Nazis here are themselves, and a mirror might be a very useful tool for them. Anyways, that's all I have for you for today, and if you like this format and you've been liking these new styles of briefs, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and also turn on all of your notifications. And if you're interested in discussing these things post facto with me personally, then don't forget to follow my channel at YEWLEEA as well on YouTube and on Instagram, and where I do lives frequently and discuss these things with you. Also, don't forget to give this video a like and a share to your friend, because maybe they're interested as well. And obviously, of course, please comment your questions, suggestions, thoughts, anything you'd like in the comments under this video, and I will be sure to read them. Till next time.